Zex Krill moved back and forth across his private hangar on Nexus 7, his four eyes darting everywhere at once. His long, thin fingers tapped against the digital screen on his wrist. The deal of a lifetime was about to happen, and his nerves were getting the best of him. The hangar was large and filled with boxes of weapons. Energy rifles lined the walls. Bomb casings sat in neat rows. Computer screens showed ships moving through space around the small planet. Zex Krill had been an arms dealer for over 300 years. His blue skin had faded to a pale shade with age, and the spines on his back had grown dull, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He knew weapons, he knew how to sell them, and he knew when a deal seemed too good to be true. The Galactic Coalition had contacted him 1 month ago. They needed weapons to fight the Voidborn Rebellion in the Outer Rim. The rebels had taken over 3 star systems already. The Coalition was willing to pay more money than Zex Krill had seen in his entire life. But there was one strange part of the deal. Along with the weapons, they wanted him to deliver one human operative. Not a team of humans, not a human ship, just one human. Zex Krill did not understand. Humans were from a small planet called Earth. They had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. They were known for their strange music and tasty food, not for their fighting skills. Humans had no claws, no armor, no poison. They could not breathe fire or shoot electricity from their hands. They could not even see in the dark. Why would the Coalition want one? Still, credits were credits. Zex Krill had found a human through his Earth contact, Mary Dawson. The human would arrive any minute now. A large ship appeared in the sky above the hangar. Its engines glowed bright blue as it slowly landed on the marked spot. The ship was marked with the symbol of the Galactic Coalition, a spiral of stars inside a circle. The ship's door opened with a hiss of air. Commander Vextool walked down the ramp. He was a Draxian, nearly 8 feet tall with gray scales, covering his body. His eyes were black and shiny and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth. 4 of his arms held weapons while his 2 upper arms were crossed over his chest. Zex Krill, Vextool said in a deep, rumbling voice. I see you have. Prepare the weapons we ordered. Zex Krill bowed slightly. Yes, Commander. Everything is ready. The particle disruptors are in the blue containers. The plasma cannons are in the red ones. The neutron bombs are in the secure vault behind that wall. Vextool nodded, looking around. The hangar. And the special item? The human? Just then, a small transport ship appeared in the sky. It was an Earth design, simple and practical. It landed next to the Coalition ship, its engines cooling down with a soft whine. That should be him now, Zex Krill said. The door of the Earth ship opened. A human male walked down the ramp. He was about 6 feet tall with short brown hair. He wore simple black clothes and carried no visible weapons. He looked completely ordinary. Zex Krill felt a moment of panic. This human looked like any other human he had seen. There was nothing special about him. The Coalition would be angry. They might even refuse to pay. Commander Vextool, Zex Krill said quickly, this is the human you requested. His name is Frank Miller. Frank walked over to them. He moved with a smooth, easy grace. His face showed no fear, even though he was standing before 2 aliens who could easily tear him apart. Good afternoon, Frank said in a calm voice. You must be Commander Vextool of the Coalition forces. Vextool stared at the human with all 4 of his eyes. His mouth opened slightly, showing his teeth. Was he angry? Disappointed? Zex Krill could not tell. Is this some kind of joke? Vextool finally asked, turning to Zex Krill. Zex Krill's heart sank. I was told to deliver one human. This is the human that was sent. Vextool looked back at Frank. You are Frank Miller, the ghost of Proxima? Frank smiled slightly. Some people call me that. Vextool suddenly stood straighter. All 6 of you? His arms moved into a formal salute position, a sign of great respect in Draxian culture. It is an honor, Vextool said, his voice now filled with something that sounded like awe. Your actions during the Carillion War are studied by all Coalition military cadets. Zexkrill looked back and forth between them in confusion. I don't understand. What is special about this human? Vextol laughed, a sound like metal grinding against stone. You truly have no idea what you've done, do you? He gestured at Frank. This is not just any human. This is the human who ended the Carillion War. Zexkrill blinked rapidly. The Carillion War had been a bloody conflict 5 years ago. The Carillions were a warrior race known for their brutality. They had attacked a human research station without warning. I thought the Carillions surrendered after a coalition military operation, Zexkrill said. Frank shook his head. Not exactly. Vextol's voice dropped to a near whisper. The coalition sent 3 battalions of our best warriors, over 5,000 soldiers from 7 different species. They were all killed within hours. Zexkrill felt a chill run down his spine. In desperation, Vexatul continued, Earth's military command sent 1 operative. He pointed at Frank. Him. That's not possible, Zexkrill said. No single being could do what 5,000 couldn't. Frank just smiled and cracked his knuckles, a strange human gesture that suddenly seemed very threatening. 3 days later, Vextol said, the entire Carillion leadership surrendered unconditionally. No one knows exactly what happened during those 3 days. The Carillions refused to speak of it, but their warriors, beings who live for battle and die with honor, were found hiding in storage rooms, begging not to be sent anywhere near the human. Zexkrill looked at Frank with new eyes. The human still appeared completely ordinary, but there was something in his gaze, a quiet intensity that Zexkrill had not noticed before. I had no idea, Zexkrill admitted. I was simply told to deliver a human along with the weapons. Vextol laughed again. The weapons are just for show. He is the weapon. He turned to Frank. The Voidborn have taken the Terrace 9 system. Our forces are being pushed back on all fronts. Their leader, Dracoth, has united all the rebel factions. Frank nodded. I've studied the situation. I'll need transport to their main base. You plan to attack their headquarters directly? Vextol asked, sounding surprised. Not attack, Frank corrected. Visit. A cold feeling settled in Zexkrill's stomach. What kind of being could speak so calmly about walking into an enemy stronghold? Transport will be arranged, Vextol said. We depart in 1 hour. As Vextol walked back to his ship to prepare, Zexkrill gathered his courage and approached Frank. If I may ask, he said hesitantly, what did you do to the Carillions? Frank looked at him with those calm, steady eyes. I showed them something they had never seen before. And what was that? Frank smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. A human who wasn't afraid. Zexkrill watched as Frank walked away, following Vextol to the coalition ship. The arms dealer had sold many terrible weapons in his long life. Planet killers, bioweapons, devices that could make stars go dark. But for the first time, he wondered if he had just delivered the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, and it had walked on board all by itself. Zexkrill could not stop thinking about the human. He sat in his private room on his ship, staring at the wall. His 4 hands tapped nervously on the desk. What had he gotten himself into? The coalition forces had left 2 hours ago, taking Frank Miller with them. They had paid for the weapons in full. In fact, they had paid extra. Zexkrill was now richer than he had ever been in his 300 years of life. But money did not feel important right now. Zexkrill needed to know more about this human. This Frank Miller. This ghost of Proxima, who made Commander Vextol, one of the fiercest warriors in the galaxy, stand at attention. Zexkrill turned to his computer. He typed in a few commands. The computer hummed as it connected to the galactic network, searching for information on Frank Miller. At first, there was nothing, just basic facts. Human male, born on Earth, served in something called Special Forces for the Earth military. Then nothing. It was as if Frank Miller had disappeared, but Zexkrill was good at finding information others wanted to hide. He had not become the galaxy's top arms dealer by accepting the first answer he got. He typed in more commands, using access codes that cost him a small fortune. The screen changed. A red warning appeared. The files he was trying to access were classified by the Coalition. Accessing them was against the law. Zex Krill hesitated for only a moment before entering another set of codes. He had friends in high places, friends who owed him favors. The screen changed again. Files appeared. Zex Krill began to read, and his blue skin turned pale. 5 years ago, the Carillion horde had attacked a human research station without warning. The Carillions were feared across the galaxy. They stood over 9 feet tall with thick armor-like skin and natural weapons that could tear through metal. They lived to fight and died with honor. The Coalition had sent their elite forces to help, the humans. 3 battalions. The best warriors from 7 different species. Over 5,000 soldiers in total. They were all dead within 6 hours. The Carillions had laughed at the Coalition's weakness. They had sent messages across the galaxy, boasting of their victory. They had promised to attack more human stations, to show the galaxy that humans were weak and did not belong among the stars. In response, Earth had sent one man, Frank Miller. There were no details of what had happened next. No battle reports, no weapon logs, nothing for 3 days. Then a message from the Carillion High Command, a full and unconditional surrender, a promise to leave human space and never return, a request that the human be called back to Earth. Zex Krill sat back in his chair, his mind racing. What could one human do that 5,000 elite warriors could not? How had Frank Miller defeated an entire Carillion war fleet by himself? The computer beeped. A message was coming in. Zex Krill tapped the screen. The face of Mary Dawson appeared, the human woman who had arranged for Frank Miller to join the weapons delivery. "I see you delivered Frank to the Coalition," she said. Her voice was calm, almost friendly, but her eyes were hard. "Yes," Zex Krill replied. His voice came out as a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Yes." The Coalition was pleased. Mary nodded. "They should be. Frank is very good at what he does." "And what exactly does he do?" Zex Krill asked. "I've been reading about him, about the Carillion War, but there are no details, no explanation of what happened." Mary's face showed no emotion. "Frank solves problems." "What kind of problems require one human instead of an army?" "The kind that armies make worse," Mary said simply. Zex Krill leaned forward. "But I don't understand. Humans are, forgive me, but your species is physically weaker than most in the galaxy. You have no natural weapons, no claws, no poison. Your skin tears easily, your bones break. How can one of you do what thousands of others could not?" Mary smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "That's exactly why we're so dangerous, Zex Krill. We had to get creative." "Creative? Think about it," Mary said. "Every other species in the Coalition evolved as the top predator on their home planet. The Draxians, the Vextol, the Tazarians like yourself. You all became the dominant species because you were the strongest, the fastest, the most naturally armed." Zex Krill nodded slowly. "This was basic galactic history. Humans didn't," Mary continued. "We were never the strongest, never the fastest. We had no claws, no armor, no venom. We were prey, not predators." "Then how did you survive?" "We became something worse than predators," Mary said. "We became problem solvers. We looked at things that could kill us, and we figured out how to kill them first. We studied our enemies, found their weaknesses, created tools, set traps, worked together. And when that wasn't enough, we got inside their heads." Zex Krill felt a chill run down his spine. "The Carillions are warriors," Mary continued. "They understand strength against strength, force against force. They have no concept of psychological warfare, of fear as a weapon. Frank showed them something they had never seen before." "What?" Zex Krill asked, his voice barely audible. "A predator who thinks like prey," Mary replied. "Someone who is always watching, always planning, always 3 steps ahead because his life depends on it. Someone who sees your weaknesses before you know they exist." A beeping sound came from Mary's end of the call. She looked away for a moment, then back at Zex Krill. I have to go, she said. Just remember, Zexcrill. The Coalition didn't want Frank because he's human. They wanted him because he's Frank Miller. There's a difference. The screen went dark. Zexcrill sat in silence, thinking about what Mary had said. He thought about his own people, the Tazarians. They had evolved with poison glands and quick reflexes. They had ruled their world because nothing could stand against their venom. He thought about the Draxians with their multiple arms and armored skin. They had become dominant because they could fight off any threat. He thought about the Carillions, bred for war across thousands of generations. And then he thought about humans, soft, fragile, but able to look at a superior foe and find a way to win, not through strength but through thinking, through planning, through understanding their enemy better than the enemy understood themselves. For the first time in his long life, Zexcrill felt truly afraid. Not of Frank Miller specifically, but of what he represented. A new kind of danger, one that could not be seen or measured or guarded against. His computer beeped again, a news alert this time. The Coalition was reporting unusual activity in the Terrace 9 system, where the Voidborn rebels had their main base. Zexcrill stared at the screen, wondering what was happening there. Wondering what one human could do against an army of rebels. And for the first time, he felt sorry for the rebels. The Coalition base on Terrace 9 was in complete chaos when Frank arrived with Commander Vex Tull. Soldiers ran back and forth, officers shouted orders. Computer screens showed maps of nearby star systems with red markers spreading like a disease. Frank stood quietly in the middle of it all, watching. His eyes moved from screen to screen, person to person. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. He just watched and listened. Commander Vextool led Frank through the busy command center toward a large door at the far end. Soldiers stopped to stare as they passed. Some whispered to each other. Others took steps back to make more room. No one got too close to the human. The general is waiting for us, Vextool said. He was surprised when I told him about you. Frank nodded. They usually are. The door slid open. Inside was a large room with a round table in the center. A hologram of the nearby space floated above the table, showing planets, stars, and ships. Around the table stood several high-ranking officers from different species. At the head of the table was General Kral. He was a Zentari, tall and thin with gray skin and 6 long fingers on each hand. His large eyes blinked slowly as Frank and Vextool entered the room. So, General Kral said, his voice deep and rumbling. This is the weapon we have been promised? One human male? Commander Vextool stood straighter. Sir, this is Frank Miller. The room went silent. Several officers looked at each other. One of them, a large Draxian female, took 2 steps back from the table. The Frank Miller? General Kral asked, his voice much quieter now. Frank gave a small nod. I understand you have a rebel problem, General. General Kral stared at Frank for a long moment. Then he moved his hand over the hologram, zooming in on one part of space. The Voidborn rebels have taken over this sector, he said. Their main base is here, a large space station orbiting a dying star. It is protected by a fleet of warships and advanced defense systems. Frank stepped closer to the hologram, studying it carefully. Who is their leader? His name is Dracoth, a female voice said. Frank turned to see a human woman approaching from the other side of the room. She was tall with short black hair and wore a Coalition diplomatic uniform. Linda Bennett, she said, extending her hand to Frank. I'm the human ambassador to the Coalition in this sector. Frank shook her hand. Good to meet you, Ambassador. What can you tell me about this Dracoth? Linda looked at the hologram. He used to be a Coalition officer, very smart, very dangerous. He believes the Coalition is corrupt and needs to be replaced. In the past year, he has united all the rebel factions under his leadership. And now, they're winning, Frank said. It wasn't a question. General Kral nodded. We have lost 6 assault teams trying to infiltrate their command center. Their defenses are too strong for a direct attack, and they can detect our ships from a great distance. Frank continued to study the hologram, walking around the table to see it from all angles. The officers moved out of his way. "I'll need a shuttle," Frank said at last. One of the officers, a reptilian being with green scales, made a noise that might have been a laugh. "A shuttle? For a frontal assault on the most heavily fortified rebel position in the sector?" Frank turned to look at him. His face remained calm, but something in his eyes made the officer step back. "Who said anything about frontal?" Frank asked. "They?" Officer did not reply. General Krall waved his hand, and the hologram changed to show a different view of the rebel station. Even if you could somehow get past their outer defenses, the station itself is a maze. They have security checkpoints at every level. Armed guards patrol at all times, and Dracoth never leaves the command center, which is here, at the heart of the station. Frank nodded. "I see. You see?" General Krall repeated. "Mr. Miller, I don't think you understand the situation. We have sent entire teams of our best special forces. None have returned. What exactly do you plan to do?" Frank looked at the general. "I plan to end your war, sir." The room was silent again. Then Ambassador Bennett spoke. "The Coalition doesn't understand how humans operate, Frank," she said. "They think in terms of overwhelming force, big ships, big weapons, big armies. That's why they're losing," Frank replied. General Krall's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Frank pointed at the hologram. "You keep attacking the station with teams of soldiers. Dracoth expects that. He's prepared for it, so don't do what he expects." "And what do you suggest instead?" the general asked. "Let me go alone," Frank said. "One person can get in where a team can't. One person can move through the station without drawing attention. One person can get close to Dracoth." The reptilian officer made that laughing sound again. "And what will you do when you find yourself facing Dracoth and his personal guard? Ask them nicely to surrender?" Frank turned to him again. "Something like that." Ambassador Bennett stepped forward. "Frank doesn't need weapons or backup, General. That's not how he works." "Then how does he work?" General Krall demanded. Bennett looked at Frank, then back at the general. "Let me put it this way. If you want to destroy the rebel station, send your fleet. If you want to end the rebellion without more bloodshed, send Frank." General Krall stared at Frank for a long time. The other officers watched in silence, waiting for his decision. "Very well," the general said at last. "You will have your shuttle, Mr. Miller. But I want it understood that if you fail, we will launch a full-scale attack on the rebel station." Frank nodded. "I understand, sir. I won't fail." "Prepare a shuttle for immediate departure," General Krall ordered, "and give Mr. Miller whatever he needs." Frank smiled slightly. "Just one thing, General. I'll need to know everything you have on Dracoth. His history, his habits, his friends, his enemies, everything. I'll have all files sent to your shuttle," the general said. As the meeting ended and the officers filed out, Ambassador Bennett stayed behind with Frank. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "Dracoth is not like the Carillions. He's smart, adaptable. He knows how to fight humans." Frank looked at her. "Has he ever fought me?" Bennett shook her head. "No, but neither has anyone else, and lived to talk about it." "What exactly happened with the Carillions, Frank? There are rumors, but no one seems to know the truth." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Some truths are better left unknown, Ambassador." "Even from other humans?" "Especially from other humans," Frank replied. "We have enough nightmares already." He turned and walked toward the door. "I should prepare. The shuttle leaves in an hour." Ambassador Bennett watched him go, a worried look on her face. Then she turned back to the hologram, staring at the rebel station floating in the darkness of space. She wondered if Dracoth had any idea what was coming for him. Frank sat alone in the small Coalition shuttle as it flew through space. The pilot's area was separate from the main cabin, leaving Frank with only his thoughts and the computer files on Dracoth. He read through everything carefully. Dracoth had once been a respected Coalition officer. He had fought in 3 wars and earned many medals, but something had changed him. He began to question orders. He spoke out against coalition policies. Eventually, he left to join the rebels. Within 1 year, Dracoth had united all the rebel groups into one force. Now they controlled several star systems and were growing stronger each day. Frank closed the files and looked out the window at the stars. Soon the rebel station would come into view. He needed to be ready. The shuttle's comm system crackled to life. Approaching rebel territory, the pilot's voice said. Activating stealth systems, they should not detect us, but be prepared for anything. Frank nodded, even though the pilot couldn't see him. He checked his few supplies, a small toolkit, a medical pack, and a communication device. No weapons. He never carried weapons on missions like this. The shuttle moved slowly toward the outer edge of the star system, where the rebel station orbited a dying red star. The pilot kept the shuttle's energy output low to avoid detection. It would take longer to reach the station this way, but it was safer. As they got closer, Frank could see the rebel station through the window. It was massive, built from parts of old ships and stations. It looked like a metal city floating in space. Around it, rebel ships moved in careful patterns, watching for any sign of coalition forces. We have a problem, the pilot's voice came, through the comm. They've changed their patrol routes. There's no clear path to the station now. We can't get any closer without being seen. Frank thought for a moment. Can you get me within range for an escape pod? There was a pause. Yes, but it's risky. The pods are not designed for stealth. They would detect it immediately. Then we need a distraction, Frank said. Can you create sensor readings that look like a coalition scout ship on the far side of the system? Yes, but they would know it's a trick. They would investigate anyway, Frank replied. They can't afford to ignore any coalition activity. The pilot was quiet for a moment. Very well, I'll create the false readings. When several of their ships move to investigate, I'll get you as close as possible. Then you launch in the escape pod. Thank you, Frank said. He moved to the small escape pod at the rear of the shuttle. It was barely big enough for one person. Frank climbed inside and sealed the door. Through the pod's tiny window, he watched as the shuttle moved closer to the rebel station. Then several rebel ships suddenly changed course, heading toward the far side of the system. The distraction was working. The pod shook as it disconnected from the shuttle. Frank felt the small engines activate, pushing the pod toward the station. On the control panel, warning lights flashed. The rebels had detected the pod. Frank worked quickly, adjusting the pod's course. He wasn't trying to avoid detection now. Instead, he aimed directly for a maintenance bay on the lower part of the station. The comm system in the pod crackled. Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted space. Identify yourself immediately or be destroyed. Frank activated the comm. Delivery for Dracoth. There was a pause. What delivery? We are expecting no shipments. Me, Frank replied, then cut the transmission. The pod raced toward the station as rebel defense systems activated. Energy beams fired from the station, trying to hit the small, fast-moving target. Frank adjusted the pod's course constantly, making it harder to hit. As the pod got closer to the station, Frank saw the maintenance bay doors begin to close. He increased speed, pushing the pod's engines beyond safe levels. The temperature in the pod rose as the engines overheated. With a final burst of speed, the pod shot through the closing doors and crashed into the maintenance bay. The impact was hard, sending Frank against his restraints. The pod skidded across the floor of the bay, hitting several containers before coming to a stop. Warning alarms sounded throughout the station. The crash had knocked out the bay's force field for a few seconds, but emergency systems quickly sealed the breach. Air rushed back into the bay. Frank released his restraints and pushed open the pod's door. His body ached from the rough landing, but nothing was broken. He stepped out into the maintenance bay. The large room was filled with equipment and spare parts. Emergency lights flashed red, and the alarms continued to sound. Frank knew he didn't have much time before security arrived. He quickly moved behind some large containers just as the main door to the bay slid open. A squad of Voidborn soldiers rushed in, weapons raised. They wore dark armor and had glowing blue markings on their skin. "Secure the area," their leader shouted. "Find whoever Was in that pod. The soldiers spread out, searching the bay. Frank watched them from his hiding place, studying their movements and their weapons. They were well trained but nervous. Their eyes darted around, and they kept close to each other. They were afraid. Good. Fear made people predictable. Frank waited until most of the soldiers had moved to the far side of the bay. Then he stepped out from behind the containers directly in front of their leader. "Looking for me?" he asked calmly. The leader jumped back in surprise, raising his weapon. "Don't move. Hands up." Frank slowly raised his hands. "I'm just here to talk to Dracoth." The other soldiers quickly surrounded Frank, weapons pointed at him from all sides. One of them scanned him with a device. "No weapons," the soldier reported, sounding confused. "No armor. No tech besides a basic comm unit. He's just a human." The leader stared at Frank. "Search him again. No one flies into a heavily defended station without weapons." They searched Frank thoroughly but found nothing. The leader seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "Take me to Dracoth," Frank said. "Tell him Frank Miller wants to discuss terms." The leader's eyes widened in recognition. His hand tightened on his weapon. "Lock him down," he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden fear. "Maximum restraints, and alert the command center." Frank sighed. "I was hoping we could do this the easy way." What happened next was too fast for most of the soldiers to follow. Frank moved in a blur, his hands striking precise points on the nearest soldier's body. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Before the others could react, Frank had taken down two more, using their own momentum against them. He moved like water, flowing around their attacks, never where they expected him to be. The leader fired his weapon, but Frank was already gone, rolling under the beam and coming up behind another soldier. A quick strike to the back of the neck, and that soldier fell too. The remaining soldiers backed away, firing wildly. Frank moved between their shots, getting closer with each step. One by one they fell, not dead but unconscious or unable to move. Within 30 seconds, only the leader remained. He backed against the wall, his weapon shaking in his hands. "What are you?" he whispered. Frank looked at him calmly. "Just a human who wants to talk to your boss." The leader dropped his weapon and ran for the door. Frank let him go. The alarm would spread faster that way. Fear would spread faster. Frank walked to a control panel on the wall and accessed the station's systems. The Voidborn used standard coalition security protocols, which Frank knew well. As the alarm continued to sound throughout the station, Frank began making his way toward the command center, toward Dracoth. And as he walked, the legend of Frank Miller began to spread through the rebel station just as he had planned. 3 days passed with no word from Frank Miller. On the coalition base, General Krall paced back and forth in the command center. Officers watched their screens for any sign of activity from the rebel station, but there was nothing. "We should prepare the fleet for attack," one officer suggested. "The human has failed." "We don't know that," Ambassador Bennett said. She had barely left the command center since Frank departed. "There's been no increased activity from the rebels, no celebration of a capture. Nothing." General Krall looked at the hologram of the rebel station. It floated there, seemingly unchanged. "I want constant monitoring of all communications from that station. If they so much as send a message about the weather, I want to know about it." Suddenly, one of the screens lit up. "Incoming transmission, sir, from the rebel station." Everyone turned to look. The screen flickered, then showed an image that made the room fall silent. Frank Miller sat calmly in what appeared to be Dracoth's command chair. Behind him stood Dracoth himself, a tall figure with dark purple skin and glowing eyes. The rebel leader's posture was different than in previous images. He stood straight, but his shoulders were slightly lowered. His eyes kept darting to Frank, then away. "Good morning, General," Frank said. "I thought it was time we had a chat." General Krall stepped forward. "Mr. Miller, it seems you are, well?" Frank nodded. "Very well, thank you. I've had some interesting conversations with Dracoth and his people." He gestured to the rebel leader. "He has something he'd like to say." Dracoth stepped forward, His voice, once known for its strength and power, was quieter now. The rebellion is over. We surrender unconditionally and request integration into the coalition with reformed governance structures addressing our original grievances. The command center erupted in shocked murmurs. General Krall raised his hand for silence. "How do we know this isn't a trick?" he demanded. "How do we know you haven't been forced to say this?" Dracoth looked at Frank, then back at the screen. "No one forced me, General. We have seen things more clearly now. There is a better way forward than war." Frank stood up. "I'll be sending you a full proposal for the integration of the rebel forces and worlds back into the coalition. It addresses the concerns that led to the rebellion in the first place. I suggest you read it carefully." General Krall stared at the screen. "What did you do to them?" Frank shrugged. "We had a conversation about history, human history, specifically." The transmission ended. The command center was silent for a long moment, then burst into cheers and excited talk. The war was over, without a shot being fired. 2 days later, Frank returned to the coalition base. A crowd gathered in the landing bay to see him. Soldiers and officers from a dozen species lined the walls, watching silently as his shuttle landed. Frank walked down the ramp alone. He looked exactly the same as when he had left. No new scars, no signs of battle. He carried a small data chip in his hand. General Krall waited for him at the bottom of the ramp with Ambassador Bennett and Commander Vex Tool at his side. "Mr. Miller," the general said, his voice formal but respectful. "Welcome back." Frank nodded and handed him the data chip. "Everything you need to know about the rebel network, their resources, and supporters within your own ranks." The general took the chip carefully. "How did you acquire all this in 5 days?" I asked nicely. Frank replied with a slight smile. The general looked at him for a long moment. "The rebellion has existed for 3 years. We have lost thousands of lives trying to end it, and you did it in 5 days without firing a shot. How?" Frank glanced at Ambassador Bennett. "Humans have a long history of war, General. Longer than most species in the coalition. We've had more practice at it, and we've learned that the best victories don't come from fighting." "Then where do they come from?" Commander Vex's Tool asked. "Understanding," Frank said simply. "I spent 2 days just talking to Dracoth, learning why he rebelled, what he hoped to achieve, what he feared. Once I understood him, ending the war was easy." General Krall shook his head in amazement. "Will you stay? Help with the integration of the rebel forces?" Frank smiled but shook his head. "My job is done. You don't need me for what comes next." But I left detailed instructions on the data chip. As Frank prepared to leave on a transport back to Earth, he was surprised to find Zex Krill waiting in the hangar. The arms dealer had come to the coalition base to deliver more weapons, but now those weapons would not be needed. "Mr. Miller," Zex Krill said, approaching cautiously. "I heard what happened at the rebel station. Everyone is talking about it, but no one seems to know exactly what you did." Frank considered the alien for a moment. "What do you think I did?" Zex Krill's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. "That's what I cannot figure out. The rebels surrendered without a fight. Dracoth, who swore to die before surrendering, now speaks of peace. It's as if you changed their minds." "That's exactly what I did," Frank said. "But how? How does one human change the minds of an entire rebel force?" Frank looked out at the stars through the hangar's force field. "Dracoth and his people thought they knew about war. They thought they knew about strength. I showed them they were wrong." "What did you show them?" Zex Krill asked. "Earth history," Frank replied. "I told them about the wars we've fought, the weapons we've created, the horrors we've inflicted on each other. I showed them what happens when humans really decide to fight." Zex Krill felt a chill run down his spine. "And that made them surrender?" Frank nodded. "The rebels thought they were fighting for freedom, for a better future. I helped them see that continuing the war would lead to more coalition forces, more weapons, eventually, more humans." He paused. "I showed them what happened to the Carillions." "What did happen to the Carillions?" Zex Krill asked quietly. Frank just looked at him. He didn't answer. The transport ship signaled it was ready for departure. Frank picked up his small bag. "One last question," Zexacril said. "All those weapons I delivered alongside you, did anyone actually use them?" Frank smiled. "What do you think?" As Frank boarded the transport, Zexacril stood watching. The arms dealer had spent his life selling the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy. Planet killers, star destroyers, weapons that could end civilizations. But now he understood that the most dangerous weapon wasn't something you could hold in your hand. It wasn't something you could put in a crate or store in a warehouse. The most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was knowledge, understanding, the ability to look at your enemy and know exactly what would make them stop fighting. As the transport departed, Zexacril made a decision. He would never again underestimate humans. They weren't just another species in the galaxy. They were the apex predators that even apex predators feared. Back on Earth, Mary Dawson received a message from Frank Miller. It was short and simple. "Mission complete. Coming home." Mary smiled and sent a message to Zexacril. "I trust your business with the Coalition concluded satisfactorily." Zexacril looked at the message for a long time before replying. "Yes, but I think I've been in the wrong business. The most dangerous weapons in the galaxy don't need ammunition." "Now you're getting it," Mary replied. "By the way, Earth is always looking for trading partners who understand this perspective." As his ship jumped to hyperspace, Zexacril thought about the future. About what it meant to live in a galaxy where the most physically unimpressive species might also be the most dangerous. And for the first time in his long life, he felt something new when thinking about humans. Not fear, not confusion, respect.